Welcome back to another episode on Journey to Authenticity, a podcast helping you to become fully authentic on your journey to success. I'm your host, Braiden Belnap, and I'm a human just like you, striving to build a dream life, all while I stay true to myself. But what if you're in a position of struggling and connecting with yourself, which in turn is creating internal conflict or even external conflict of connecting with others, whether it's on a one-on-one conversation, on social media where you're trying to connect with a community? That's exactly why we have Connor Dehlin joining us today, because he went through that all. He started at a very young age speaking for an organization, learning how to connect with others through somebody else's message, which after a couple of years of speaking around the country, in other countries, he asked himself what his own message was, which is where he learned to connect with himself, really develop that message by connecting one-to-one. From there, learning how to build a community. That in mind, welcome to the show, Connor.
Thanks. Good to be happy here, Braiden. Happy Saturday morning.
Absolutely. Bright and early. Anyways, just to jump right in. So what initially inspired your entrepreneurship, speaking, author, all the things career?
Yeah, it really started with my grandpa. So I was like 11 years old, and I'm the oldest grandchild, so I'm the favorite, right? My grandpa, and he's definitely like a personal development guy. He did some stuff. He was a dentist, but he always had a side hustle in the MLM world and that kind of thing, right? And he calls me, he's like, Connor, what are you doing on Tuesday? I'm like, the third grade, right? And he's like, there's this event going on downtown, and he like names off all these speakers. One of them I remember is Zig Ziglar. There's a funny name for you, right? And he's like, you got to come to this event with me. I'm like, well, got to ask my mom, right? Like, I'm literally like 9 years old. And he's like, oh, I'll talk to her. And I remember, so I went to this event downtown, personal development, like just this long line of speakers, sat on like the second row with my grandpa, and I was just caught up in the energy and the emotion of that event. Like, I loved the live event. It was so cool to see these speakers be on stage and like creating impact and creating change. And I was just in it. And driving home from that event, I told my grandpa, I'm like, Grandpa, I'm going to be on stages like that someday. And what's really cool is I could tell he believed me. And I've been very fortunate to have really solid parents, be born into a lot of stability, and then that extending the next generation as well to grandparents that just instilled in me a belief that, man, not only is there no dream that's too big, but you can get there way sooner than you think. And kind of from that point, I've made a lot of interesting career decisions and life decisions that I feel like have just been building my experience and credibility to be able to do that. And that's what I'm doing now. Kind of wild.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Shout out to Grandpa.
Absolutely. Yes.
Grandpas and grandmas, they always have a special impact. Normally, for sure, can't speak for everybody here, but
yeah, I remember one other day, it was like my 8th birthday, and he asked me, hey, on your birthday, I'm going to take you to breakfast. It was a Saturday morning like this. He probably picks me up at like 7:30 in the morning, because that's how he was. He was up at like 4 a.m. every day. And we get in the car, and I haven't even been in the car for like 30 seconds. He's like, Connor, do you know what an entrepreneur is? And I actually looked at him like, yes, I do. It's someone that starts their own business. Like, I was that little smart kid. He's like, yes, exactly. And spent the next 2 hours like talking to me about building your own business and this and that. And so, yeah, some of those values were instilled in me early on, and I ate it up.
That's amazing. So did he own his own dental practice, or was he working for somebody?
Yeah. So he actually, it's interesting, me right here in Riverton, South Jordan area, but he started a dental practice in South Jordan right on 106th, and they are the second longest owning like continual business license in the city of South Jordan. If you think about it now, like that's a big deal. And so, I mean, where they were at basically west of Redwood Road in South Jordan, when they started that back in the 70s, it was like, this was out the middle of nowhere. And now, they're third generation practice now. With that said, that was the only thing in life I decided I didn't want to do. I did not want to just go into dentistry and be the, third generation, even though it was great. I just couldn't imagine working on people's teeth in the same office every day for the rest of my life. It just didn't jive with me.
Well, you benefit from having good teeth, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a non-negotiable in the family.
Fair. And teeth make a change in
Absolutely.
Your look, your appearance. Your smile is everything.
For sure.
Especially when you're speaking on stage.
Yes. I couldn't tell if you were saying my smile was everything. I wanted to say thank you. I'm just teasing.
No,
that felt like a compliment there.
It was, dude. You have some good teeth. Shout out
Got
to
to show it off.
Grandpa
There's
or your
confidence,
dad.
right?
So I assume your dad's a dentist as well?
No, it's actually that's on my mom's side, but my mom's a dental hygienist and has worked at the office for 35 plus years too. So, but uncles have been the ones that have followed that footstep.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, right, we set our goal and we like to envision that linear path.
Sure.
And don't get me wrong, we need to start there.
Yep.
When we're creating a goal, when we're creating a vision, if we get caught up in all the challenges, normally we're going to create emotions that just, quite frankly, keep us trapped.
Sure.
So, was your path to success linear, or what were your pitfalls in that area?
Definitely not. I think I had some big learning lessons as I hit like my mid 20s, where I lived a lot of my life as if it was a race. Like, okay, here's the goal. Go, 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 go. I was very motivated by age. Like when I got in my speaking career, I ended up speaking for one of the largest seminar companies in the world, kind of got in speaking young. And I loved the fact that it was like, I'm 22 speaking, the next youngest speaker's 35. Like it was very kind of competitive, I think. In like me, it was just what I used to drive. But then I kind of hit this point at like 26, 27 years old where you realize like, well, what am I racing to? There's no finish line, right? There's never a point where you're like, oh, I did it. I can kick my feet up and mission accomplished. So when you realize there's no finish line, you can push, you can go, but the whole point is to enjoy along the way, right? And to, see what kind of impact and what you can do around that. And so the moment it became less outcome focused for me and more just being able to relax in that moment, I feel like that propelled me even faster. It's really a little paradoxical, but yeah.
That's fair. So what was that time of awakening where you're like, I need to slow down and just enjoy this?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll just kind of get into it, but I spent basically 21 years old. I walked into one of the largest seminar companies around and I told them, hey, I want to speak, right? Like I want to speak for you guys. And they kind of laughed at me because I looked like I was 16, right? Their typical client was like preparing for retirement. And they're like, well, you're not gonna be able to speak for us, but you can be on the crew, right? You can help with events, start, make sure our clients are happy, all these different things. And so I'm like, all right, I'm in. And I remember watching that first event and kind of sizing it up, sizing the speakers up. And I made a really aggressive goal, I thought in my head, of I think I could speak if I stick with this within 5 years. That's what I said. And then as things happen in that world, like I learned the presentations, I was ready to go. 6 months later, a speaker gets sick. I'm in Rhode Island and they've got a hotel ballroom full of people that need someone to get up there. And I was like, I can do it, right? Took that opportunity, was just ready enough to do good enough to be invited back the next week. And then basically that was what I did for the next 6 years. 47 states, 8 different countries. I was in a hotel room probably 22 nights a month. And I got all of this speaking experience. By the time I was 26, I had 10,000 hours on stage, like that Malcolm Gladwell quote, right? And so for me, the awakening came from, all right, this is awesome. I have this skill of speaking. I know how to connect. I now have experience backing it. But what is my message? What do I want to share, right? What can be uniquely me? And I think that's what really sparked kind of this moment of like, well, who am I? And what value do I want to bring to people? And what is the specific sort of impact I want to make? And that didn't come overnight. Like that came from all of a sudden. Then truly, I got off the road, stopped working for that company, put my entrepreneurial hat on, and that's had all sorts of twists and turns. It's been the last 6 to 7 years that's got me where I am. But today, where I'm happy about is I know I have more clarity in my message, in my skill set, in what I want to give to people than ever before. And when you get there, like that's authenticity, right? That's when all of a sudden it clicks and you're like, this gives me energy, this is fun.
Yeah, when you know who you are, why you're doing what you do,
yeah,
and you're doing it, there's a weight that's just lifted off your chest.
For
Feel
sure.
free.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your message?
Yeah, so for me, honestly, as I progressed in my career, I just realized my skill is being able to confidently take a platform and connect with a group of people, right? And the key to doing that is telling stories, is being able to connect with emotion, is not just giving information, but giving insight, right? And So what I realized, in my entrepreneurial path is, well, if you're a subject matter expert today or a thought leader, you want to be a speaker, an author, even a small business owner that needs to be the face of your business, you have to figure out how to communicate on today's platforms, right? Leaders have always been good communicators, but the leaders that stand out in their time, it's because they figure out the platforms of the day, right? So I always compare, like, if you were to just look at US presidents, like FDR. FDR was known for his fireside chats. Why? Because that was the time that all America sat around a radio and listened to speakers. They listened to the news. A lot of the country didn't know that FDR was in a wheelchair, right? And if he were in the TV era, you probably wouldn't have looked at him as the same powerful leader as he was, but he figured out, man, he had a radio voice, right? 1960, the election comes around, and JFK knew how to be on TV. It was the first time we were really seeing a president, watching him talk to us, seeing him connect through the screen. He figured out that medium. 2008, Barack Obama figured out Facebook, right? Like, all of a sudden he was appealing to a younger audience because he went somewhere a president had never gone before. And even in 2016, Donald Trump used Twitter to, you have the national news networks that are like covering what the president tweeted, right? And putting the tweet up on the screen. And so to me, it's like there's the old school basics of communication. There's the fundamentals that never change. They're human nature, they're human behavior. They might evolve, but it is what it is. But then how does that translate to the platforms where people are? And so my message today is, all right, how do we master those basics, but then figure out how that translates to podcasts like we're in today, or short form content, or social media, and video is key to that. So that's been my path.
I love it.
Yeah.
You're right. Communication really doesn't change. It's just how you distribute it.
For sure.
Find.
When you get in the personal development world, you realize, like, man, they're all saying the same thing. And you go read like How to Win Friends and Influence People, or How to Think and Grow Rich. Like, both those books are almost 100 years old, and every principle in them is still totally true. But it's just different, maybe how that's executed. It's different where that goes to today. And so that, I think when you grasp that it's like, okay, if you can, it's not old school versus new school, right? I work with so many people now that, like, you got these older people that are very skilled, so much experience, so much wisdom, actual value that they can give, but they don't know how to deliver it to the group using the platforms, right? And then you've got younger people that they know the algorithms, they understand the code, like they can use the platform, but they don't know how to communicate. Like, younger generation is scared to pick up a phone and talk to someone on the phone, right? So if you can bring those things together and take old school connection and, those principles and apply it to where people are hanging out now, like, that's how leaders win.
Absolutely. So with the more curious question, have you read How to Win Friends and Influence People, The Digital Age?
I haven't. No. I would like, how to tell me about it.
I honestly, this is one of my first books I picked up. So it's been a long time, but it was good.
Yeah.
I've read both.
Sure.
At this point, my memory's molded.
Yeah.
But from what I recall, is it essentially just related the same principles of the initial book with the digital age.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. It's crucial. You got to learn how to communicate first.
Yeah.
In my opinion, you're the expert here, but I think that's the first part. It's like setting the foundation.
For sure.
Go learn. Go read those books. How to Win Friends and Influence People. Go talk to people like yourself. How to communicate. How to build a community.
Yeah.
What is your message? Who are you?
Yeah. Well, I love those questions because that's where I think people tend to want to skip steps, right? So they'll come to you first like, I want to get on stage, or I want to speak to a lot of people, or I want to have a podcast that pops off, or whatever it might be. And they're wanting to start with like, okay, how can I connect to the group? How can I connect to the big community? How can I connect with people on stage? But really, like, what I found is there's steps that come into play before you get there. When you talk just connection, like, connection first off starts, are you connected to yourself? Right? If you're out there feeling like, I just struggle connecting with people, I can't make this, my guess would be you're not truly connected with yourself authentically, right? When that relationship's strong, where you feel comfortable and confident showing up in who you are, well, now you can connect with someone one-on-one, right? So like if I'm connected with myself, now I can have an actual relationship that's not me just playing a persona, that's not me in a role. If that's the case, even if we do connect, it's not an authentic connection, right?
Absolutely.
That one-on-one is then done. And, for coaches, for speakers, like how much the amount of one-on-one connections you need to have in order to make you feel confident that you can then have more of a one-way conversation from a stage, like that's how you get to that point. So when you can connect one-to-one, now you can connect one-to-many. And then where I think kind of this next piece is taking place when you talk community is not only is it important for you as a leader to connect you to the many, but then can you get your many connecting to the many? Can you get your community connecting with each other because of the values that the values that you share, the structure that you built, the opportunities that you've given them. And that's where the magic happens, but you don't get to fast forward.
So let me make sure I'm hearing this correctly. So obviously connect with yourself first.
Yeah.
That's essential.
Yep.
Start there.
Yep.
Then can you connect one-to-one? Can you go out to coffee?
Correct.
Can you go have a one-on-one conversation to really connect authentically?
Yep. And about your message, about what it is that you want to share, right? So, I mean, if you're selling something, don't expect to go sell to a group if you can't sell one-to-one first.
Absolutely. I love that. And then going one-to-many. I assume one-to-many can be a stage, social media,
Correct.
anything of that nature.
Yep.
And then the one-to-many, but then your many connecting to others.
It's kind of the many-to-many.
Is that your community connecting with each other essentially about your message?
Correct. Yep.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah. You've created, I mean, that's what a platform does, right? Where now all of a sudden, if you use your platform to connect to a group of people, but now you've brought people together that are all interested in the same things, right? And so, if your podcast just takes it to the next level as you're trying to grow this, your hope is that not only are the two of us connecting with all the listeners that are home listening right now, but are there two people out there going, oh, I listened to that episode too, and they're making a connection about that independent of us. Man, if that can happen, that's pretty awesome.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And that's when I looked it up. It's insane, but it's like if you start a podcast and if you would just have two people talk about you, talk to two other people, like the growth over 10 years is absurd. Mm-hmm. It's stupid.
Yeah. And I think when you talk that too, it does take time, right? Like, sure, we live in a viral world that we want to just like blow up fast. But when you're really trying to build a solid base and a solid community, it comes from persistence and time after time and creating that loyalty. It's interesting. We'll work with a lot of people that they have a video or two that goes viral, right? And it's like, oh, I'm in the world now. I got to start a podcast or whatever it might be. And if it's just that viral moment, that fades really fast, right? And it's because you didn't know necessarily what that was built on, right? And so, you've got to find, okay, what's going to be the ingredients to something that can be lasting?
Absolutely. So I want to take it back to the basics for just a moment. Let's say somebody's out here listening. They're 25 years old. They want to be an entrepreneur, although they're really struggling within their internal self of who am I? What is that I want to do?
Yeah.
Talk to that person. How can they start to connect with themselves?
Yeah. I think to the younger generation out there right now, there's a lot of pressure, specifically because of social media, to like chase your dreams, be all in, like burn the ships, go do your thing, which I love. Like, obviously that hustle energy is great and pushes people to do awesome things. But I think that sometimes if you're sitting there and you want to skip all the work process and the learning and figuring out how to truly be an expert at what you do, then you're going to struggle when you go start your thing, right? So for that group, like my advice is figure out what it is that you want to do, right? Like, okay, if you were to design what that ideal position or business or dream job might be, and then second question, what are you really good at, right? Like, where do your skills lie that you can go sharpen that? Then go find someone that does exactly that. That's 10 steps ahead of you. That's where you want to be. Go learn from them, right? Like, don't skip the process of watching them and learning. And you may not make a whole lot of money, if any, at the beginning, but you've got to do that, because if you haven't put in that work, then when you go to just start your own thing, your confidence is hollow, because you don't have that time, that the hours to back it up, right? And so my advice would be to go follow those that are doing what you want to do, go learn from them, and then throughout that process, start building what it is that you want to build now, right? I think people think there's this switch that all of a sudden you're like working for someone else, working for someone else, working for someone else. Okay, now is the time. I'm on my own. And they haven't done any steps to build what they're going to do on their own now. That's a hard place to be in, right? So like we just had the conversation with you. In my mind, you're doing it completely right, where okay, I want to be podcasting full time. I want to write. I want to be an author. I want to do this. But you still have a day job right now, right? Let this be your passion for as long as it can be a passion project. And then it becomes obvious when your passion is like, oh, this absolutely can be full time. And I know how. And then you're taking that risk from a place of more stability.
Yeah, it's a ease transition.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's going to be clean.
For sure.
But you're easing your way self into it. And quite frankly, we talk about enjoying the journey.
Yeah.
When you're filled with stress, go mentality, quite frankly, you're guaranteed to make mistakes.
For sure.
But when you're coming from a place of joy, fulfillment, love, passion, purpose.
Yep.
Man, that emotion is so much greater.
Yeah.
And you'll operate at such a higher level.
For sure. And so, to those younger, my advice would be ask yourself, what steps can you start taking now to get you to where you want to be? Because I guarantee you they're there. And there are things that you can do right now without some major life changes that will start paving the way. Don't feel like, oh, I'll do that when I'm able to stop. Start now.
I love that. And I'll connect it to what I really talk about. It's the whole vision, right? A whole vision encompasses a plethora of steps. It's not just what's my next step. It's steps. Got to connect with your past and present. Essentially, who are you right now? What are you doing? Mm-hmm. Along with having that plan. What's your actual life vision? At the end of your life, what would you be okay with?
Sure.
Would you be at peace on your deathbed if you accomplished all these things, became all these things? And then you'll actually know what those next steps are.
Sure.
You'll be able to say, hey, I want to be a speaker. So right now I can go speak at a speaker's company.
Sure.
You know what that next step is more efficiently.
Yeah. I don't think we ever are able to map out all the steps. I think we can map out like the signposts, right? Like, okay, if we're going to get there, here are all the checkpoints or the signposts that we'd have to get to along the way. But to me, I think where you can relieve a little bit of pressure if you're younger, trying to get in entrepreneurship, whatever it might be, there's two things I think you need to know really well. One, where do you want to go? Like we just talked about. And two, what's your next step? That's literally all you need to know. You do not need to know step 3 and 4. And in fact, you're typically not going to know step 3 and 4 until you're on step 1 and 2, right? Like it's not even revealed to you until then. And so now, if you don't know where you're ending up trying to go, then that makes it all very difficult, right? But, I check in with myself constantly, and I have for the last decade of like, is what I'm doing right now keeping me on that path? And, and then those times where you're like, I got to open up to the next thing, right? Like I'm ready for that next step. You can start to feel it. And when you open up to that, it's crazy in life how fast that next step often will reveal itself.
Absolutely. At that point, you've become it, right? You're operating as a speaker, even if you're not necessarily that full-time paid speaker yet.
For sure.
You're still doing that step. You're still working towards that next goalpost to becoming that.
Yeah.
When you operate out of that energy per se, whatever you want to call it, naturally you start to attract more of, or I like the word of attract, but you're more just operating on a vibrational frequency
for sure
to be able to actually go do it.
I'll use the attract word all day long. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's pivot to the one-to-one.
Okay.
They start to figure out who they are, what they're doing. They start to work towards that next goalpost. How can an individual really start to connect one-to-one?
Yeah. I think once you know yourself and the value you can bring, then I think the next step is to have just a genuine interest for others, right? And that can only come from a place of abundance and gratitude, right? When you realize the scarcity, it's like law of scarcity is such a thing of the past. In the world we live in today, there is so much wealth, so many opportunities, so many clients to go around. It's crazy, right? And so when you can start to adopt the mentality of like, I want to help other people win. I want to see other people be happy. And that comes from when like you're okay in here, right? And when you're okay in there, now, okay, how can I just go about my life giving away what I want to get back, right? And I mean, I had that realization like a year or two ago where I realized I was reaching out to a lot of different people for mentorship, for support, asking them questions. Hey, can we go to lunch, right? I had a podcast at the time. You're reaching out people that you see above you and you're asking for their time. And I realized I'd had a few opportunities in a row where I'd kind of denied that to people that had wanted that from me. And it was like, whoa, I've got this backwards. Like if I feel like I have the ability to ask for that for those I appear that or I feel that are ahead of me, I've got to be able to give that back to those that are looking for it for me too. And so like that I think is where a lot of people get it wrong of like give away what it is that you want. If you want to be rich, go figure out how to help other people be rich and watch it come back to you tenfold, right? Give it away.
They usually are better at what you're teaching.
Yeah.
That's just the truth,
Yeah.
right? If you're teaching how to get rich, you're probably going to be rich.
Yeah.
If you're teaching somebody how to be authentic, you're probably authentic.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah. And so those one-to-one conversations, I think you have to actually care, right? And if you don't care, then that's a really good sign that you're probably not in the right spot, or you don't believe in the product that you have, or you don't really feel that your message can make that much of an impact. And so, that's what you want to hunt for. Like you want to get so much fulfillment and satisfaction from seeing other people get it, other people light up. And when you're there, okay, now that's when the momentum starts to build.
Absolutely. You mentioned one of the best connecting points, how to connect with other people is be curious, right?
Yes. Ask questions.
We're bringing it back to Curious George days. I don't know if you ever watched that. I certainly did.
Mm-hmm.
Curiosity is everything.
Yeah.
Ask questions.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a Walt Whitman quote that Ted Lasso quotes in the sitcom too, but he says, be curious, not judgmental. And I love that because being curious doesn't mean you have to go with the flow of what everyone else does, right? But if you look at every interaction of what can I learn from this person, and especially those that are different from me or have had a different experience, go into that with curiosity, and a lot happens in that process.
I love it. Now we're bringing it to the one of many.
Okay.
Right? And
Yeah.
I might be wrong here, but I feel like this is really where you shine.
Yeah. It's where I've spent a lot of time. Kind of unique.
What are some essential fundamentals as just quick pointers, and then we can talk about them, of how somebody can really start to connect one to many?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So first off, I think it comes to everything we just talked about in that one-to-one interaction. Can you then just see that same feeling expanded for an entire group of people, right? And that's why I say like you can't skip that one-to-one step and go straight to a stage, because you don't have the memories now backlogged that you can pull from on a stage to know that this actually does work, or that this conversation I've had in 15 one-on-one conversations. So I'm guessing that there are some of you in the room here today that might be feeling the same way, right? Like that's what builds on top of that. But I think the shift then becomes when you're speaking to one-to-many is you've got to be careful with the energy that you take back in. Because the moment you put yourself out to a group, you have to recognize the point that you're not going to appeal to everyone. That some people may not like you, some people may not be there, and guess what? That's totally okay. And that's something I really had to learn when I was on the road speaking. Like I give 2 90-minute presentations a day to a room full of strangers. And by the way, I was really young, right? I'm going to talk about money. And so I knew every moment I got, like when I walked up on that stage, the feeling on most people's faces was like, who's this guy? What are you going to talk to me about? Right. And trying to then have people kind of disarm themselves, bring the walls down a little bit, and then actually get them listening to you and then fully with you. Like that feeling's awesome, but it doesn't have to happen and probably won't happen for 100% of the room, right? So don't get hung up on, well, yeah, this is an awesome podcast episode. I had 15 people that messaged me and said this conversation just made their day and made them think about something differently. But there were 2 people that made this comment or didn't like this. Like, you've got to get to the point where you're so confident in what you do that the perceptions, the judgments of others can kind of float off your back.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The other day, I forget what platform it on. I would just laugh. Now,
Yeah.
it's taking some time.
It's for sure.
I started this 21, I think. I forget exactly how old I was. I should remember that. But I got a comment the other day. I was like, man, anybody can buy podcast equipment nowadays, can't they?
Mhm.
And I was just like, yep, they can.
Yeah, it's
And I'm
awesome.
doing a
You want me
pretty
to
good
tell you what
job
I'm
of
doing?
it? Exactly. So, I mean, walk us through that, right? Was that hard for you initially when you weren't able to convert 100% of the room? What were some of those experiences like for you?
Yeah, I think what you have to do then is focus on the wins, right? Because the one win that you have with people, if you're truly be able to make an impact and make a change on them, that outweighs any of the potential negative, right? So I think it comes to and that at the end of the day is finding your audience, right? Finding who's resonating with what you're resonating with or what you're saying, and then stick with that group. You might expand over time, but whoever is really clicking right now, there's plenty more people that are just like them, right? So I think figuring out some specifics of what it is that's working and who it's working for, do more of that. And you stay in that phase for a while.
Is there a way to start to figure that out of, hey, who is my person that I'm going to talk to?
Sure. I mean, I think that comes from the experience of the one-on-ones, right?
Sure.
And that's where as you continue, whatever it might do, if you have a message, product, service, whatever it might be, that's where you have to be listening to that feedback, right? And you've got to have the desire to always be improving and wanting to tweak. I went to Russell Brunson's training this week, and it's funny because Russell Brunson's someone that's really interesting to me because, you know, he's become, from a one-to-many like sales standpoint, he's done more than most people out there, but he has had, like, it's not necessarily his natural gift or ability. And so he had to learn it. Like, he looks at speaking, connecting with one-to-many as a scientist. And if you think about like the funnels, they have data over and over and over for him to just go, here's what works, I'm going to do it, right? And I think that's been his key to success and why he's able to teach it so well, because he had to figure out a process. He couldn't just say, oh, I'm likable, people like me, right? Like, he had to figure out why and what it was that made it work. And so whatever your business is or whatever you're trying to share, like, you need to figure out, well, where am I trying to take people? What are the indicators for success? And then how can I see that? Because like, your goal isn't how many likes can you get. If you're live in front of a group, yeah, they clapped. Yeah, they laughed, but I'm not making impact with laughs. Right? Like, what is that's that next step? And then how can you measure that?
I love that you pinpoint that. And that connects both of those so well.
Yeah.
Bring what you were learning from those one-on-one conversations and bring that forward and who you're going to be talking to.
For sure.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
So with that, and this is more of a question. Mm-hmm. You're the speaker here. Mm-hmm. But from what I've learned and what I've researched in this podcast and my coaching, is that somebody's going to listen to you for really one of 3 reasons.
Okay.
Either your education, your awards, something of that nature. 2, your celebrity, or your entertaining. And what I've learned, whether it's from your one-on-one conversations, connecting with yourself, or the one-to-many, is it's best to have a little bit of all of it.
For sure.
I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, so you said basically credibility 1, and then entertaining was 2, or no, what was the second?
Celebrity.
So a celebrity. People know of me, and then that I'm an entertainer. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's what value do you bring, right? Like, if you want people to be interested in you, then what are you doing that's interesting, right? Yeah. Or that people are going to connect with. And so, yeah, I think it's just a process of figuring yourself out and being being really aware. And so that's where, like, I think it's this balance of you've got to be ultra aware of how people are responding, while at the same time not worrying about the judgment and being authentically you there. So I think it's the balance of those two things. And I think that, like, phrase about celebrity, I don't necessarily like that might get people's attention at the beginning, but I think in our society, celebrity is actually losing a little bit of a weight, right? Because one, like, platforms are so accessible now that you can find a small niche, and that niche may not be interested in the celebrity vibe at all, right? And they may not be able to relate very well with that group. And so I think the shift is happening in the market right now where more people are able to do a difference, but it's judged on, well, what is your content? What do you have? I was having this conversation the other day it's interesting in the speaking world right now with, like, big events that you see and celebrity headliners, right? So Gary Vee's coming to speak at this, or you're going to have the Shaq or whatever it might be. A lot of these people that are getting paid for these sort of appearances, they won't do keynotes anymore. Like, a lot of speakers aren't doing keynotes because they'd prefer to go up and have a panel interview like this on a stage. Why? Because it's a whole lot easier. For your Shaq, you just show up, answer questions, you're yourself. You don't think about it before, you don't think about it after. And I think what that's then created is a product, that's not connecting in the same way. Why? Because you can go Google Shaq, and how many podcasts could you find with Shaq out there right now? Hundreds. Go listen to them. I don't want to go to a live event and watch a podcast, right? So to me, I think that leads an opportunity to do the work of putting together, hey, if I've got 10 minutes, how can I absolutely make the most of that 10 minutes, give as much value as possible? And I think people that are doing that now are getting rewarded, because there are a lot that aren't.
I love that.
Yeah.
You're so right.
Yeah.
I remember going to conferences when I first started and just eating this up. And I've gone to some where it's just Q&A, and I'm like,
yeah. The energy drops. You're just like a third party listening to two people talk. And what's crazy is, like a podcast, let's say if this were on a stage, you and I'd be having this conversation, but then there's 2,000 people out here that I'm not even looking at. My whole body is moved to you. If you're going to be a speaker and you're going to talk to a room of people, you actually, as the interviewer, are a block to this connection, right? Boom, I want to connect with these people. I want to connect with the group and the audience here. And so, like, that to me, I think is an opportunity where you can realize, okay, how can I do that? Now, as an interviewer, man, if you're on a stage or on a panel, guess what? You are simply the facilitator of a conversation between your guest and the audience. That's the mindset you need to have. Not you have a bunch of spectators to listen to your one-on-one conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's powerful. In keynotes, you see people standing up, dancing, crying.
Yes.
You see all of this emotion and all of this goodness, where when it's just Q&A, people are just in their thoughts.
Yeah, and people are lazy interviewers, right? Like, if I can think through a 45-minute talk, it's like, okay, what are the key insights, the main takeaways? What do I want people to do differently after I'm finished? And now I can strategically plan all 45 minutes to get to there, right? If I'm in an panel interview, then it's just kind of a little bit without an anchor, and we're just going to go wherever the conversation takes us and probably have some lame small talk in the middle.
I hate that.
Yeah.
Small talk.
Yeah.
Let's just cut the show and move forward. It's not adding value to everybody.
Yeah. So what do we take from all of that? It's okay if you're not a celebrity, right? Celebrities listening, keep making your six figures from showing up and doing an interview. That's fine, right? But if you can bring valuable content that's going to help people get where they want to go, it's going to solve a problem. If your content can be a bridge and you can show the way for people, you're going to have a competitive advantage.
Absolutely. So now pivoting to the one to many, right?
Okay.
Is this something that just naturally happens, or what's the science of having this friend talked to this friend about your podcast or your event or your social media?
Yeah. So I think this ties more into community now. So like I think that becomes that next goal of if I want to create community, then how do you view yourself as the community builder? And you really have to see yourself as a leader. You set the tone. Like the person that creates that community sets the tone for all interactions that go through that. And so to me, I think if you're going to build community, you've got to clearly communicate a few things. Like first off, clearly communicate your values. Like, what do we stand for? If you're a part of this group, if you're in this community, if you're listening to my podcast or whatever it might be, there are certain values that we live by here, right? Like for you, it might be a growth mindset is a non-negotiable, right? It's that we are curious, not judgmental. It's that we are abundance mentality where we actually try to build each other up in the community and there isn't any feeling of competition, right? Like whatever those values might be, you communicate them clearly. And then I think that a good leader of a community sets very clear expectations and possibly even rules, right? Like if we're going to play in this environment, here's the standard. I expect this from you, and in return, I promise to give this to you, right? Like this is a two-way agreement. And here's some no-nos. Here's some things that if you do, that's not what we're about, right? When that's communicated clearly, what then happens is your community then starts enforcing those values, those beliefs, those ideals, and people naturally either weed themselves out or are weeded out by the group if they don't come with that same mindset, right? And so I think that's where it starts. Having a very clear vision for the type of community you want to build and then clearly explaining those values, beliefs, rules that then people live by. Then once that's the case, if you've done that well, then you just provide opportunities for people to connect with each other. You provide the platform, the ability for them to support each other, for them to get closer to their goals, whatever it might be. And when that happens, then it's almost like you can put it in autopilot a little bit. The only reason you're able to put it in autopilot is because you did a ton of work beforehand. But if you do that right, then let your community work for you. And that's where the magic is.
I love that. That's phenomenal. And you just read this book, what, WTF, Worth the Follow.
Yeah.
Right? What was the inspiration for this book for you?
Yeah, so I released the book in November of this year, or of last year, excuse me. And so it's been out a few months now. Been kind of fun to step more into that author role. Like it was something I've always wanted to do since I was a kid. But really, I mean, that was a big part of finding myself. Like I hired a book coach about 4 years ago when I all of a sudden now, as an entrepreneur, my businesses were coming into play. I wanted to do more speaking. That was me authentically. And I'll tell you something that's kind of embarrassing here, but I hired this book coach and I'm like, all right, I want to write a book. And she asked me, she's like, and this is a lady that like helps speakers, helps subject matter experts, like compile all this and write a book. And she's like, okay, well, why? And I said, because speakers write books. And I was kind of joking in the way I said it, but also like I realized at that point that was my primary motivation. I'm like, well, this is what a speaker does. You've got to do that. And she looked at me and didn't think my joke was funny. And she's like, that's not good enough, right? Like if you're going to do this sort of project, you've got to be really clear on your why. And she challenged me in a lot of different ways. Like you've got to be able to answer this, 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 and this. And I left that conversation like, whoa, I was just put in my place, right? And realizing I wasn't necessarily ready. And it's the same thing I just talked about in the keynote. Like I didn't know what was the meat that I was going to share. Where did I want to take people? What allowed me to be able to speak uniquely as an expert there or someone that could share? And that made me really do the work for a few years to get to clarity on that. And then all of a sudden that came from then practicing what I preach and with our businesses and helping people and countless people sitting in front of a camera and trying to figure out how to have them tell their story and create content in a way that can reach people, right? How do you show up confidently wherever that might be and having to work with people over and over and over to do it. And then all of a sudden when I realized, oh, I have it now because I've been out there doing it. Now's the time that I can put this together and compile it. And so, yeah, it was an awesome process. But at the end of the day, a book to me is kind of like the granddaddy of clarity, because like the book coach eventually told me, she's like, just think of your book as 12 keynotes. Every chapter is a 45-minute keynote, right? And all of a sudden thinking through it that way, I was like, oh, okay, well, do I have enough material? What am I going to do? What am I going to put together now? And then once you have that, now you just go out and apply it. You help people implement it, right? And it's fun.
I love that.
Yeah.
So 4 years ago, you started looking into writing the book.
Yeah. Once I really started taking it seriously, it probably took me about 8 or 9 months, with the last couple months kind of in like I definitely mode like, we're going to release on this day. Let's go. And I mean, I was making changes the day before we sent it to the printer. Like it was a big project and a big undertaking, and happy to have it done. I'm not doing that again for a few years.
Oh, I'm in that final stretch for mine.
It's awesome.
It's no joke.
Yeah, I mean, you'll notice this, but I felt like the closer I thought I got to the finish line, the more I realized I had to do. Like when you really get to that editing and refining point, it's tough. Now, with that said, I've had a lot of people that have wanted to write a book or talk to me about that. And they're like, I feel like I need to do this first, or I've got to have this accomplishment or that. And my thought process is, a book is just another form of content. It's another platform. Now, it feels very final because it is, right? You've got it printed out. It's physical. It's not like some social post that you can just continually make a new one each day. But with that, who's to say like it's your final book, right? I think a lot of people think of the book as like, I'm going to finish and share all this. No, my book is what I've learned in the last 10 years, right? And I have all that down now, and I can teach and have businesses that implement some of those things. But actually in my mindset, I flipped it to, okay, all the content I'm creating now moving forward is testing for whatever's next. What's the addition to that? What is going to take that further? Because now I got to do all the work and have the conversations that's going to prepare for something in 3 years or whatever it might be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, Alex Hormozy, Alex Hormozy.
Yeah.
Phenomenal, genius, whatever you want to call him. I think he's one of the greats of our time in business. His strategy is he tests all of his content on Twitter and X prior to actually making a post. Yeah. And whatever does well there, he converts to a post.
Sure.
And whatever does, he's using this content to write his books. Because the fun fact about him is he's always working on his next book.
Totally.
And it's always, what is the next thing?
Yes.
He started with offers. Yeah. And then he's with leads, whatever he's working on now.
Yep.
But it's always to add to.
For sure. It's expansive.
And quite frankly, when we're talking about expansive, we talked about, starting to one-to-one, or starting with yourself, one-to-one, one-to-many, and then one-to-many to many. We talked about going and learning from somebody, how you started at a speaker organization, speaking around the country for them, and then you pivoted on your own because you learned that skill. We're living in a generation where a lot of people feel that they have to let this go and then go do this. It doesn't work that way. Everything that you experience from your past, you get to take forward with you.
For sure.
Period.
Yep.
Whether you're going from this career to this career, this business to this business, principles apply.
Yep.
Communication. It used to be, quite frankly, really just one-to-one, and the one-to-many was practically getting in the newspaper. It's a lot more open now.
Yeah.
But the principles of communication from the past still apply, and that's why How to Win Friends and New Influence People is still around.
Yeah. I want to give you a compliment, Braiden. So I've been on a lot of podcasts now and have people, been interviewed a lot. And I can tell that every conversation you have, because you're doing it with me right now, is an opportunity for you to learn. And what you've done, your pattern throughout this whole podcast, is you are pulling out the insight. You're pulling out the actionable item, the so what, the why me, the who cares, the this is what I've got to do. You're really good at like, so 1, 2, 3, like stepping things out. And that I think is such an important skill for both learning and leading and teaching, right? Because like I teach in the book, I teach a process when it comes to any sort of piece of content. I teach this structure of HDMI, right? So an HDMI cord at the end of the day is the most universally applicable cord to help you connect with wherever you go, right? So HDMI, a hook. What's your reason to listen? What's the compelling story, the fact, something that's going to jar me a little bit? D is what I call the direction or the destination. You want to tell people either one of two things. here's where we're headed. Here's the direction, right? I'm not necessarily going to tell you where we're going to end up, but I'm going to take you this way. Or the destination is, hey, here's where we end up. I'm not going to tell you exactly how we're going to get there, but stick with me, right? So the direction or destination. M is what I call the meat. What are you going to teach? What is the process, the specifics, right? And then 4, the I is where I feel most people in today's world miss. And the I is what I call the insight, right? Humans crave insight, not information, right? We are all products of the information age. Information, there's more out there than we possibly know what to do with, right? So if your goal, sometimes I'll hear speakers or people put out content, they're like, my goal is just to provide value. No, it's not. If all you're doing is providing value, or all you're doing is entertaining or making someone laugh, that doesn't create change in the listener. Change comes from the insight. And so, that's why I feel like you are a very good learner and very good at hosting these sort of conversations, because you're listening to the meat, you're listening to, okay, that's why it's interesting, but here's the insight, right? And so for those listening, when you're putting together content, do the work for your audience. Tell them the so what. Give them the path, right? And then when you're learning, don't just stop at, oh, that's interesting. That's information. No. What can I do about this, and why do I care?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that HDMI analogy.
Yeah.
You gifted me the book. I'm beyond excited.
There you go.
Truly. That'll be my next book. That's my promise to you.
Sweet.
And we'll give the audience we'll give them the insights of the book. And then they'll go buy it for themselves.
Yeah.
Anyways, I've really appreciated you coming on. I really have 3 main questions just to round this out.
Cool.
First is, if there was anything you had left for the audience, one last message, what would that be?
I would just say start, right? Like we all know those things in our head that are kind of just like kicking us in the background, like, oh, I want to do this, or I want to get going, but I'm not ready, or I've got to start this. Start taking those small steps now. That doesn't necessarily mean a big life change, but just get going, and don't let fear and all the what ifs and if you can't explain why exactly, that's just fine. You're not supposed to anyway, but you're going to learn more as you get going. So I would say just start taking those small steps today that are going to lead you to where you really have that push deep down that you want to go.
I love it.
Yeah.
Take this step.
Yeah.
What is it? And I forgot the author too. Horrible. Have 20 seconds of insane courage. It's like it takes 20 seconds just to go.
Yeah.
I'm going to quote this in below the description so you guys can go do it. But it really just takes that one step.
For sure.
Once you start to build that momentum, it's just one step after another, after another.
Yeah.
And then you start crushing those walls down.
Yeah. And that's how you build confidence. Like, to me, confidence and like true confidence comes from within, but it comes from keeping commitments to yourself. Like, there's no greater power than when man, I said I was going to do this and I did it. I said I was going to make this attempt and I did try. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it perfect, but when you can get habitually in a place of setting a vision, making a plan, and then going out on the execution of that, that's when you start to feel like, I have value. I have something to bring here. And it just continues.
You just defined confidence. Keeping your word to yourself, to others, to a stranger, whatever the case is. If you say it, do it.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. And most importantly, the commitments you make to yourself. The unseen stuff. And for me, like, that's when I feel like took a leap in my life of I've always been pretty externally motivated, right? I did things when it meant something to someone else, or when I needed to show up, or, like that whole side. But the little things that were unseen, that are the day-to-day, the showing up, that was easy for me to justify to myself why I didn't need to do that or whatever. Not today. And if you won't hold yourself accountable, it's hard to look at someone else from a place of true authenticity, being confident.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's powerful. What is your definition of an authentic life?
An authentic life, I would say one that's intentional. Like, my word for 2025 is intentional. And I think to me, when you're inauthentic is when you're just kind of going with the flow. You don't go within, you don't ask yourself the hard questions. You're not sure where you're going and don't have a clear vision, right? That's going to lead to you going with where life pushes you or being influenced by those that are in your closest circle, right? Being authentic is being very intentional in asking yourself truly, who am I? What do I want to do? Why does this matter to me? Who are the most important people in my life? How do I want them to talk about me? And then you go about living your life intentionally to be that person, and that just becomes you. To me, that's authenticity.
Powerful. What's next for you? I mean, you've written the book. You have full-time filmmaker.
So 2 businesses, full-time filmmaker, and then the WTF Network, Worth the Follow, where we do content for individuals and consulting. So what's next is just continuing to grow the businesses so they're more machines. I'm not in the day-to-day of full-time filmmaker. My business partner, Landon, runs that. And it's an awesome business, a great brand that's helped a lot of people throughout the world. And for me, I want to build WTF to do similar things to what full-time filmmakers done of, giving people that guidance, that direction, and, giving them tools to go share a message, product, service with the world. And I see, the business becoming more and more sustainable on its own without necessarily me having to be in all the details. And then for me, as far as what do I see next in my career, way more of a focus on speaking. The more I can be on stage sharing this message, the better, and authentically creating. But I see myself moving more into kind of broadening the topics as well into more development and leadership principles and communication and relationships.
I'm excited to see that.
Yeah.
We're already seeing that in your content. So you practice what you preach.
Yeah.
You're testing it.
Yeah.
For your next book or whatever the case is.
Yeah. Communication is at the core of it all. And I think we've got some cool things going to come that it'll benefit relationships. So those relationships with yourself, with a significant other, with people, clients, and with the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How can myself and my audience be supporting you?
Yeah. If you listen to this episode, shoot me a message on Instagram. That's the easiest way to follow me there. So you can just look at my name. I'm the only Connor Dehlin in the world. You can search me there. You can also check out WTFnetwork.com. That gives you a feel for our product, services, what we do for people. And go buy the book. It's on Amazon. Just search my name.
I love it.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it. Love what you're doing. A way to just get after it.
Thank you for listening to the Journey to Authenticity podcast today. If you like what both myself and Connor had to share, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. This helps to ensure that I get the highest quality, most interesting guests to help you transform your life. With that in mind, have a good rest of your day, everybody.